The story behind the North Pole on the Mercator map. A mysterious beginning. For over 500 years, people believed that the North Pole was hiding a fantastic secret. An enormous black mountain for powerful rivers dividing the Arctic Ocean. And a magnetic force so strong it could pull in ships and guide all compasses toward true north. And all of this was carefully drawn onto maps, including one of the most influential of them all, the Mercator map. But where did this idea come from? And what happened when explorers set out to find this hidden world, only to discover that reality was far stranger than fiction? Chapter 1. Early Perceptions. A world of myths and legends in the 16th century. The North Pole was a place of pure mystery. No one had ever seen it, no explorer had set foot there, and no ship had pierced the ice to reveal its secrets. It existed only in the minds of scholars, sailors, and dreamers. But where knowledge failed, imagination flourished. For cartographers, these uncharted territories were not merely blank spaces. They were invitations to speculate, to theorize, and to weave fragments of ancient texts into geographical reality. And no one did this more famously than Gerardus Mercator, the legendary Flemish mapmaker, whose projection would become the foundation of modern navigation. His maps were known for their precision, built on meticulous research and contemporary reports. Yet when it came to the Arctic, he relied on something far less tangible: myths, lost manuscripts, and second-hand accounts from a world that had never been seen. In his famous 1569 world map, Mercator depicted the North Pole as a perfectly symmetrical landmass, divided into 4 quadrants by vast rivers. At its very heart, he placed Rups Nigra, the Black Rock, a towering, magnetic mountain that supposedly explained why all compasses pointed north. But how did such an idea come to be? Chapter 2. A lost manuscript and the mysterious monk. Much of Mercator's vision stemmed from a now-lost book called Inventio Fortunata, The Fortunate Discovery. Supposedly written by an unknown monk, this book was said to contain first-hand descriptions of the Arctic, gathered from a journey into the frozen north. According to various accounts, this monk traveled as part of an expedition, possibly in the 14th century, reaching latitudes no European had ever recorded. Upon his return, he detailed extraordinary sights: a massive whirlpool, 4 immense rivers dividing the polar lands, and at the center, a colossal black mountainy place of immense magnetic power. Though Inventio Fortunata has long since vanished, its influence endured. Fragments of its descriptions were passed down through later texts and letters, most notably those of Jacobus Sianoian, a Dutch historian who relayed these fantastic claims to Mercator. It was through these secondary sources that the idea of the North Pole as a structured, almost mythical landscape took hold. By the time Mercator created his 1569 map, Europe was undergoing a profound transformation. The age of exploration was in full swing, and discoveries in the New World had already reshaped geographical understanding. However, vast areas of the globe remained unknown to Europeans, and the Arctic was chief among them. Mercator was not just a cartographer. He was also a scholar, deeply influenced by Renaissance thought. His maps were not only meant for navigation, but also reflected the intellectual landscape of the time, one that blended science, faith, and historical tradition. In this period, mapmakers did not separate fact from speculation as rigidly as we do today. Instead, they worked with the best information available, which often included historical texts, mythological accounts, and religious interpretations. Mercator's depiction of the Arctic was not an isolated fantasy. It was part of a broader tradition of geographic symmetry that had persisted since antiquity. Many medieval and Renaissance thinkers believed the Earth was structured according to divine order, and Mercator's map reflected this idea. Perfectly divided polar land, the 4 immense rivers, the central mountain, all fit within the belief that nature followed a structured, almost mathematical pattern. Additionally, Mercator's work was heavily influenced by Ptolemaic geography, which had dominated European cartography for centuries. Even though new discoveries were challenging these classical models, many still held on to the idea that the world's unknown regions must align with ancient theories. The Arctic was no exception, since no explorers had disproven the existence of Rups Nigra. It remained a compelling explanation for the mysteries of the compass and the unseen forces of the North. Mercator would go on to refine his Arctic depictions in later maps, including his 1595 posthumous Arctic chart, which still contained elements of the mythical geography. It wasn't until well into the 17th century, with increased exploration and better scientific understanding, that cartographers gradually abandoned these ideas in favor of more empirical representations of the polar regions. Yet in Mercator's time, the belief in a structured, almost mystical Arctic was not an outlier. It was an extension of how the world was understood. His maps, though deeply flawed by modern standards, were a product of an era in which history, legend, and scientific inquiry were inseparably intertwined. Chapter 3. The First Expeditions. Searching for the unknown as the age of exploration progressed, the great maritime powers of Europe set their sights on the Arctic. By the 17th and 18th centuries, explorers had mapped much of the known world, but the North remained an enigma. Some believed it to be a land of ice and death, an inhospitable barrier between civilizations. Others, however, held on to a more hopeful vision that the North Pole concealed a navigable passage, an open sea warmed by unknown forces, or even an undiscovered landmass that could reshape global trade. At the time, European geographers speculated that the Arctic might not be entirely frozen. Some believed that if warm ocean currents could be found in the North Atlantic, they might also extend further north, creating a temperate sea at the pole. If this were true, a navigable Arctic route could revolutionize commerce, offering merchants a faster way to reach Asia without the perilous journeys around Africa or South America. Encouraged by these theories and guided by maps that still depicted Mercator's vision of the Arctic, British and Dutch explorers launched daring expeditions. Their ships set sail with high expectations, hoping to chart new passages, claim new lands, and unlock secrets that had eluded humanity for centuries. But the reality they encountered was unlike anything they had imagined. The Arctic was not an open sea, nor was it a land of myth and legend. It was a world ruled by ice. The first explorers who ventured north found themselves in an alien landscape, one of endless frozen waters, towering glaciers, and relentless storms. The deeper they pushed into these uncharted territories, the more they came to understand the true nature of the Arctic, a vast and merciless expanse where survival was a constant battle. Their ships, designed for rough seas, but not for the crushing power of shifting ice, often became trapped. As the ice closed in, the wooden hulls groaned and splintered under the immense pressure. Some crews were left stranded for months, forced to endure the blistering cold with dwindling supplies. Scurvy, frostbite, and starvation became the true adversaries of these early expeditions. More deadly than any imagined monster of the North, the Dutch navigator Willem Barents was among the first to experience the full force of the Arctic's brutality. In 1596, while searching for a northeast passage to Asia, Barents and his crew found themselves trapped in the ice off the coast of Novaya Zemlya. They were forced to spend the winter in the frozen wasteland, constructing a makeshift shelter from driftwood and the remains of their ship. Against all odds, some of the crew survived, enduring months of darkness, sub-zero temperatures, and attacks from polar bears before they could finally attempt to return home. But even such harrowing accounts did little to deter future expeditions. One of the most significant attempts to penetrate the Arctic came nearly 2 centuries later, in 1778, led by the famed British explorer James Cook. By this time, European powers had already made great strides in global exploration, yet the Arctic remained stubbornly unknown. If a passage existed, Cook was determined to find it. Commanding the HMS Resolution and HMS Discovery, Cook sailed into the frigid waters of the Bering Sea, navigating along the coast of Alaska in search of an opening that would lead him through the Arctic and into the Atlantic. His reputation as an explorer had already been cemented by his Pacific voyages. But this journey was different. This was a confrontation with the very limits of human exploration. As Cook pushed further north, the waters grew increasingly treacherous. Icebergs, some towering as high as cathedrals, drifted ominously around his ships, while the temperature plunged to lethal levels. The deeper they ventured, the more apparent it became that the Arctic was not a place to be conquered. It was a realm that would decide who was permitted to pass. Eventually, an unbroken barrier of ice brought Cook's expedition to a halt. No open waters, no hidden passage, no mythical lands, just an endless expanse of ice, stretching as far as the eye could see. With no other choice, Cook turned back, defeated not by storms or enemy forces, but by nature itself. Chapter 4. The Arctic in Literature. A realm of imagination. Even as the explorers of the 17th and 18th centuries returned with reports of an unyielding world of ice and isolation, the Arctic continued to live on in the imagination. A reality stripped the North of its mythical lands and hidden passages. Literature rebuilt them. The polar regions became not just a geographic frontier, but a symbolic one, a place where the limits of human ambition, knowledge, and power could be tested. For some writers, the Arctic was a gateway to the unknown, a place where otherworldly civilizations might exist beyond the reach of ordinary men. For others, it was a mirror reflecting back the hubris of those who sought to conquer it. Whether a land of wonders or a realm of horror, one thing remained certain: the Arctic was never just ice and snow. In 1666, long before explorers had fully mapped the Arctic's barren expanse, Margaret Cavendish, Duchess of Newcastle, imagined something far more fantastical. In the blazing world, she envisioned the North Pole not as a frozen wasteland, but as a threshold and entryway to a hidden utopia. The novel follows a woman who is kidnapped and set adrift at sea, only to be carried by ocean currents to the Arctic. Instead of meeting her end in an expanse of ice, she is transported to another world. Entirely a parallel universe bathed in golden light and inhabited by strange intelligent beings, bearmen, fishmen, and birdmen, who have mastered sciences beyond human understanding. Here in this alternate reality, the protagonist is crowned empress and rules over a society of harmony, reason, and invention. At a time when the world was still largely unmapped, Cavendish's vision reflected the idea that the Arctic might be more than what it seemed. A place where the rules of reality bent, where something miraculous might still exist beyond the horizon. Her work blended scientific curiosity with sheer fantasy, imagining a North Pole that was not just a physical place, but a doorway to the extraordinary. Yet as the age of exploration pressed on, the Arctic revealed itself not as a land of warmth and wonder, but as a cold and hostile void. And soon, literature's vision of the North began to change. By the early 19th century, the Arctic had lost much of its mystery. The belief in a navigable polar sea was fading, and the dreams of hidden lands were giving way to something colder, more daunting. When Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein in 1818, she placed part of her story in the Arctic not as a land of utopia, but as a place where man's overreaching ambition led to despair and death. The novel begins and ends with the doomed voyage of Captain Robert Walton, an explorer obsessed with pushing further into the Arctic than any man before him. Through Walton's letters, the reader is introduced to Victor Frankenstein, a scientist who has likewise pursued knowledge beyond its limits. In the novel's final moments, Frankenstein and his monstrous creation chase each other into the heart of the Arctic, a frozen wasteland where neither man nor monster can truly survive. Shelley's Arctic is not the fantastical gateway of Cavendish, but a void, a place where human ambition is stripped away, where the elements are indifferent to suffering, and where isolation consumes those who push too far. The novel's final image, of Frankenstein's creature drifting away on an ice floe, is a chilling reminder that the Arctic does not care for the dreams of men. It is not a passage, not a utopia, not a place to be conquered. It is a graveyard of those who seek too much. What these two works reveal is the transformation of the Arctic in the human imagination. In Cavendish's time, it was still a place of possibility, a land that might yet contain hidden worlds. By Shelley's era, it had become something else, a reflection of human frailty, a place where nature's power dwarfed even the grandest ambitions. But even as explorers continued to map the true Arctic, literature refused to let go of the idea that the North was something more than ice. Writers would continue to look to the pole as a place of mystery, horror, and revelation. For as much as the real Arctic belonged to the ice, the Arctic of the mind would always belong to the unknown. Chapter 5. The End of Myths. Discovering the real North Pole. For centuries, the North Pole had been a realm of speculation. A blank spot on the map where cartographers, storytellers, and dreamers projected their wildest imaginings. From Mercator's symmetrical landmass and Rupe's Nigra, to the utopias of the blazing world, and the frozen desolation of Frankenstein, the Arctic had always been more than a place, had been a symbol, a mirror for human ambition, fear, and wonder. Yet as the great age of polar exploration neared its peak, these myths began to erode, not all at once, but gradually, with every expedition that returned with new knowledge. The North was no longer a blank space waiting to be filled with imagination. It was a frontier of reality where ice and science would replace legend and lore. By the late 19th century, explorers had pushed deeper into the Arctic than ever before, where earlier expeditions had faltered, leaving only questions and shattered hopes. New technologies and hard-earned experience allowed explorers to finally confront the truth of the North Pole. One of the most significant turning points came with Fridtjof Nansen's Fram expedition. Unlike his predecessors, Nansen did not search for mythical lands or open seas. Instead, he devised a radical strategy, allowing his ship, Fram, to freeze into the polar ice and drift with the currents, proving that the Arctic Ocean was not land at all, but an ever-shifting mass of ice. For centuries, explorers had imagined mountains, islands, and unknown continents at the pole. Nansen proved there was nothing but an endless frozen ocean. A little over a decade later, Robert Peary claimed to have reached the North Pole in 1909, while his achievement remains disputed. It was a moment that symbolically ended the age of Arctic speculation. If Peary's claim was true, then the last great geographic mystery of the Arctic had been solved, not with the discovery of a hidden paradise or a magnetic mountain, but with the realization that there was nothing there at all. Finally, in 1926, Roald Amundsen, Lincoln Ellsworth, and Umberto Nobile flew over the North Pole in the airship Norge. From the sky, they confirmed what explorers on foot had long suspected. No land, no hidden kingdom, no great rivers leading to a lost world, just a vast, indifferent expanse of shifting ice. The myths were over. With these discoveries, the North Pole was no longer a place of legend, but of fact. The stories of Rups Nigra, the warm Arctic Sea, and secret civilizations faded into history. The Arctic was not a gateway to another world, nor a land of gods or monsters. It was a place governed by cold, by wind, by ice. Yet in losing the fantasy, humanity gained something else: understanding. The Arctic became a place of scientific inquiry, a region where researchers sought to unravel the mysteries of climate, ocean currents, and the adaptability of life in extreme conditions. It became a proving ground for human endurance, a place where explorers and scientists continued to push the limits of what was possible. Today, the Arctic remains one of the most fragile and vital regions on Earth, a barometer for climate change and geopolitical tensions. While we no longer see it as a land of hidden wonders, it still holds mysteries just of a different kind. The dreamers of the past may have been wrong about what lay at the pole, but their curiosity, their relentless pursuit of the unknown, laid the foundation for the knowledge we have today. And yet, one of Mercator's greatest influences remains with us to this day, not in his depiction of the Arctic, but in how we see the world itself. The Mercator projection, developed in 1569, was never meant to be a perfect representation of Earth's geography. Yet, it became the standard for navigation and eventually for modern world maps. The problem? It distorts dramatically. The further you move from the equator, the more exaggerated land masses become. This is why Greenland appears as large as Africa and why the Arctic, despite being mostly ocean-covered and shifting ice, looms over maps as a vast, seemingly dominant region. For centuries, this distortion was practical. It allowed sailors to navigate more easily. But as the Arctic was explored and mapped with increasing accuracy, the contrast between the myth of the Arctic and the reality of its geography became even more apparent. Today, the Mercator projection still shapes our perception of the Arctic. It makes the polar regions seem much larger and more central than they actually are, reinforcing a legacy of mystery and importance that traces back to Mercator's earliest maps. Even as we acknowledge the Arctic as a place of science rather than legend, it still looms large in our collective imagination. Because of hidden lands, but because of how we choose to map it. Perhaps that is the greatest truth of all. Myths do not vanish because they are proven false. They evolve. In their place, new questions always arise. We no longer believe in the magnetic black rock at the center of the world. We no longer think the Arctic hides utopias or secret civilizations, but we now see it as something just as profound. A fragile, yet crucial part of our planet. A region that holds answers to the fate of our climate, our oceans, and our future. The myths of the past have faded, but the Arctic remains uncharted in different ways, still a frontier, still a place where human curiosity meets the unknown.